Dungeon 42. By S. Jackson. Chapter 195. Diversions. Rather than linger in my office, I'd moved to the sitting room and was curled up on a couch. Henry joined me, but he was looking at the notices I'd put up on a chalkboard. It was hard to keep my tail from lashing in agitation. All things being considered, I gave Aleem and company a return order. Talking to him and Tiller about their potential participation in a raid was going to be my first order of business when they got back. My current goal though was trying to scrape together a team so I could avoid sending them if at all possible. Why was simply and it wasn't a question of skill but rather utility. They were much more valuable to me long term. Ideally I'd just send my dungeon denizens to deal with the issue, but they couldn't leave without becoming a guardian to a contractor. 42. This isn't without risks, but I don't think it's a bad idea, Henry offered. He'd been looking over my general plan for how to handle the raid. I'd had a decent list of volunteers already and they were already sorting themselves out into teams like they would for the usual raid league. Team cohesion and was going to be a big deal going into an unfamiliar environment. They needed to work well together and understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. Leveling might be a problem since I'm not sure how well they'll progress, but hopefully it won't be that hard to manage, I said. Not once they are beyond the desert. There will be plenty of creatures for them to hunt if Myra and Hetch's reports are accurate, Henry said. I'd been keeping in contact with them but he'd asked for more strategic information to help with the planning. Information I hadn't looked over yet. I glanced over at the chalkboard even though I knew exactly what it said. Make deals, fix builds, level up, kill Dr. Satan. The steps were simple even if pulling them off wouldn't be. Investigate Stronghold and liberally apply murder would be the next phase once that was dealt with. Again, easy to write on a chalkboard, but certainly not going to be easy to actually do. I intentionally turned my thoughts back to the current issue. I wasn't worried about the dungeon denizens. They would be fine and could respawn in the worst case scenario. With regard to the mortal element, I was going to have to form 5 additional contracts if I found enough volunteers to leave Tiller and Aleem out. The most obvious path to getting said volunteers was approaching people already involved with the dungeon deviling like the Rusty Daggers and making a deal. I couldn't help an annoyed sigh. Something on your mind? Henry asked. He'd turned away from the board and was looking at me curiously. I'm trying to think of what to say when I try and convince them to make a deal, I admitted. The advantage of me resetting them and getting a higher level member of their class to optimize their build would be obvious. It would probably still be difficult to sell them on the idea of that being worth risking themselves in Dr. Satan's dungeon. I didn't know anything about him, but given how he operated I doubted that anything in his dungeon would be as pleasant as my monsters. Thoughts of deadly mushrooms, parasites, and other morbid guardians haunted my thoughts. I'm sure it will be fine. They aren't strong, but they aren't as stupid either. Just offering to help them gain levels would likely have been enough, Henry offered after a moment of thought. He walked over and joined me on the couch and my tail immediately wrapped around him like it had a mind of its own. Maybe, I'm going to make it a 3-run contract. They'll still have to keep my secrets as part of it, but if they survive 3 tries or kill Dr. Satan sooner, they can choose not to renew, I admitted. If they couldn't do it in 3 runs even with the skeletons to assist then the team was fucked anyway and there wouldn't be a point in making them keep going. Worried what they'll do with newfound power? Henry asked. I just nodded. I'd get the skeletons assigned to them back along with any gear I didn't want them to have long term, but they'd keep the levels and other increases. Probably something stupid, Henry said with a shrug. I snorted at that. Probably, I agreed. It really wasn't worth that much though. What might happen if the daggers were less than ideal after all? I doubted that the world didn't have its share of shitty people with more power than they deserved. Fuck, planning really doesn't agree with me. Not for things like this. I'd rather just get it all moving and see how it goes rather than sit and fret about things I can't predict or do a damned thing about, I admitted. Really, underneath it all, I'd rather just go tear the bastard out of the ground and kick in his core myself. It wasn't an option, the system saw to that, but it didn't change the impulse. One I felt it had been trying quite hard to push down, along with who knew what else. There wasn't an easy way to tell apart what was natural to me vs what the system imposed aside from one glaring issue. The feelings I felt certain it gave me, they made sense. They were orderly and fit with what I was. Hide in a hole, protect yourself, distrust everything that wasn't of my own making. Fear the light of the world above because you are vulnerable outside of the shelter of the dungeon. They contrasted rather violently with my anger, joy, and curiosity. I was interested in the world above and the people there. I loved making my dungeon interesting rather than just efficient or deadly. What was probably unbridled rage that barely registered as a ripple when I heard about whatever new fucked up thing someone was doing to the world. Someone else who fit the role better probably wouldn't have noticed the shackles the system placed on them. I only really did in moments like this where I wished I had a sturdy pair of legs and a tire iron to go sort this annoying fucker out with. I don't think it agrees with much of anyone, Henry said with a smile. I also think I wasn't a particularly kind person, even before all this. I've been thinking about how to get around the restrictions on myself and go kill him, I admitted. How is that and not kind? Henry asked. Beating someone to death? I asked, confused by the idea. To take the duty on yourself and protect your own, how could that not be kind? Henry clarified. Then I'm truly a kind person, I said, laughing. Yes, but not harmless, Henry said, kissing the knuckles of my hand. Oh? Is that what you like about me so much? I asked playfully even though I wasn't exactly in a playful mood. It felt better than lapsing back into my other thoughts though. One of them, Henry replied easily, lips moving to the back of my hand. I very much liked where this was going and locked and barred the door. I wasn't in the mood for an interruption and it seemed like Chris had a sixth sense for intruding. Sly, I chided without any real rebuke as he kissed my wrist. Henry's lips traced a path up my arm, each kiss sending a shiver through my body. The world beyond the room ceased to exist. There was only Henry, only this moment, only us, and I reveled in the relief of it. Chapter 196. Questionable Decisions. Jared's day had started more or less like most of his had since coming to the valley. He'd gotten up, breakfasted with the rest of the daggers, then gone to look for odd jobs to do at the guild. Training would come after that, then lunch and maybe some friendly game for chits with whoever was bored in the guild's main room. It was a pleasant kind of way to live in between gathering trips into the dungeon once a week or so. His belly was full, the work was steady, and he set his own terms about his time most days. Being invited to the town hall for breakfast by the mayor had seemed like a somewhat unlikely thing that morning. Due was eccentric though and didn't seem to think anyone was beneath her to speak with. Something he'd expect out of a mayor of a smaller place, but not a being like her. So he and the daggers had gone and things had been pleasant. Breakfast had been served at the long table he'd seen the last time. The tall chairs he assumed were normally for the town elders were comfortable and Due sat across from them rather than at the head with her man Henry at her side. It made it easy to talk to her, not that Jared or any of the daggers had much to offer besides compliments on the food. Well, now that you're all comfortable, I suppose it's time to talk business, Due said once the meal was cleared away. She wasn't hurried or agitated, but Jared couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Certainly, what can the daggers do for you, Mayor? Jared asked, emphasizing the title. Due was friendly in her strange way, but they weren't close and she wasn't going to get a discount. I'd like you to hear me out about a job opportunity, but I'll need you to agree to keep everything I tell you about it and related matters a secret, Due said simply. We can certainly do that, Pip piped up. Jared kicked him under the table. Making promises was always a bad idea. You won't have a choice, should you agree to the terms, Due said. Jared was about to start trying to back out of whatever she meant to offer but didn't get a word out. Without warning, something like a glowing bit of paper appeared in front of him. He could see words on it though not read them. The deal is 10 gold in exchange for keeping what we discuss confidential thereafter, no matter if you take the job or not. You're under no other obligations at that point and can decline the job or leave the valley if you feel uncomfortable, Due said. Silence followed the declaration. Due didn't object or try to rush them despite the lack of immediate agreement. Jared looked at Quint, who was staring at the square in front of him hard, mouth moving slowly. He'd started taking reading lessons unlike the rest of them. Easy money, Cord said happily, touching the white square. It disappeared like it had never been, a small bag appearing on the table. Cord opened it to look inside, then promptly stuffed it in his belt pouch. The rest remained, however, including the one in front of Jared. This is, Jared was stalling, or rather trying to. Being asked to do dirty work or hide something wasn't that strange. They'd done the odd bit of skullduggery when circumstances demanded. They'd also cut and run rather than do so when it suited them. It was the contract that had Jared feeling like he was going to shit himself. They'd be paid in gold if they agreed to keep anything they were told confidential. Something he knew because Due had read it aloud to them. I'm fine waiting, Quint can take his time, Due said, waving him off. True to her word, she just waited, which added its own kind of awkwardness as she looked at them with her blood-colored eyes patiently. She was telling the truth. If we accept, we get money and have to keep the secret, but that's all. I triple-checked, Quint said, looking exhausted by the end of it. Looking at the glowing white square in front of him, Jared felt rather certain his day had taken the kind of turn that led to a story. The sort that went one of two ways, and that's where I fucked up, or best decision I ever made, and he wasn't sure where this was heading. Okay, Argent said, money appearing before him as he accepted. Jared wanted to punch the stupid dog in the face, but refrained. His ire was a result of hoping the other man had sense enough not to accept without even a cursory discussion. That mistake was on Jared. You can speak freely in front of me or step outside if you would rather, Du offered. Still calm in a way that had Jared sweating. It wasn't like she seemed to think she knew how things were going to go, he was accustomed to arrogance. No, it was the way she didn't seem to particularly care if they agreed or not that was getting under his skin. What the fuck could you possibly need us for that's worth 10 gold? Pip asked. One milky brow rose at that, and then Du just shrugged, gesturing to the contract. Only one way to find out, she said simply. Idiot, Pip said. Jared looked over and found Quint staring in shocked disbelief at the bag in front of him. I didn't. I just wanted to touch it, it didn't seem real, Quint said in fearful explanation. Jared just groaned. He'd been fighting down that impulse too, but it hadn't been that hard to resist. Pip, are you taking this? Jared asked for formality's sake. For 10 gold they could bend me over the table and stuff me with pine cones. I was just waiting on you, Pip said with a shrug. Jared wanted to refute that but didn't bother. He'd never held a gold coin in his entire life. If the amount hadn't seemed so surreal, he'd have likely accepted faster. Jared sighed and accepted. Pip followed suit. Clouds must have been passing outside as they talked because the room started to dim. Heavy ones as the shadows grew longer. Only it didn't stop there, the outside seemed to disappear and leave the room with only a pair of candles to fend off the gathering darkness. Candles that hadn't been lit a moment earlier. The 10 gold isn't the value of the work, it's the value of the secret, Du said. And I assure you, I'll be getting my money's worth. Things were definitely shaping up into a "and that's where I fucked up" situation, which was the candles went out. Chapter 197. Motives. Quint did his utmost not to shit himself when the lights went out. Something magic was definitely happening, though he had no fucking idea what. There was just no other explanation for them being plunged into pitch darkness in the mid-morning like that. This was one of the rare moments when one of his little tricks might have been handy. He wasn't good at it, but he could make little orbs of light. When he could remember his chants anyway, or how his mouth and breathing worked. Let's start simple, gentlemen. You know me as Du, the mayor, and that's true, Du began, voice seeming to come from everywhere in the dark. Her voice changed as she spoke, turning softer, whisper-like. Dim lights began to glow, but they didn't seem to really illuminate things. Just define the edges of the darkness better. Quint could see his hands though, and the chair he was still sitting on. The table was gone though, and he couldn't tell where they were, only that it wasn't the town hall. It was too big. The valley and the town in it is part of my domain, and I'm honest when I say I like to keep things pleasant and safe up there, Du continued. Her voice shifted more, sounding familiar, and not as it took on a layered aspect, like two women speaking just faintly out of sync. The light continued to brighten, revealing more details of the room, like the fact it was made of a black stone, which was why it was so hard to figure out where the shadows ended and the stone began. But I'm also more than that, Du added. The lights came up further and Quint found himself looking at a carved stone dais. I'm this dungeon master, and it includes everything within the valley as well as underground, Du said as the lights came up enough to reveal a throne with a tapestry behind it. The figure on it seemed to be made of shadow, difficult to distinguish from the black stone of the throne. Its shape was revealed in contrast to the tapestry, oddly elongated but almost human in some ways. It shifted strangely as Kant looked at it, as if his eyes couldn't quite track it. The only steady part of it was a pair of green flames where the eyes should have been. Oh fuck this! Pip shouted, bolting from his chair. Quint looked to see where he was going and found it was a massive door. He hit it hard, clearly trying to force it open, but it didn't budge. Jared and Cord weren't far behind him, and Quint had no idea where Argent was. His chair was just empty. I want you to kill another dungeon and I'll give you the heroic classes and equipment needed to do it, Du called out. What? Quint caught off guard. He'd been trying to decide if he should join the others or try and remember any kind of anything that might help him come up with a plan to get out of the nightmare they were in. That's the job offer. I'm powerful in my domain, but I can't act outside of it, so I need contractors to do it. I want the other dungeon dead because he's spreading diseases like bloody mana fever, Du added. A shout from the other side of the room indicated that the rest of the group had perhaps heard her but clearly weren't listening. Why would you care? Quint asked. It didn't make any sense, though a few other things were starting to. The town being too orderly and well managed had bothered him even though he'd liked it. How that was possible was pretty obvious if it was hand-built by a single being. Move, idiot! Pip shouted from across the room. I want to know, Quint said, finding what little courage he had. The situation was terrifying, but no one had moved to actually harm them yet. She doesn't, she's just fucking lying, Pip yelled. Du got up, moving down from the throne, her shadow form seeming to slip in and out of focus as she moved. Well, sure, I supposed that you have no way to verify my motive. My wanting Dr. Satan, the other dungeon, dead and him spreading disease is true though, Du countered. I've got no reason to lie about that part, particularly since you need to know how he operates if you do decide to take the offer. Why the fuck would we do that? Jared demanded. I'm not going to presume, Du said with a shrug. But I am going to ask you all to sit back down. The sooner you get the job contracts and make your choices, the sooner you are free to go. No thank you. Cord shouted. Everyone looked at him in confusion, never having heard him speak so politely before or with such clear terror. Okay, clearly this isn't going to move forward productively. I'm going to send you all back to the dorm. You can flee in terror or take some time to cool off if you prefer, Du said. Wait, we're free to go? Quint asked. Per the deal, yes. You've heard my secret and been offered the job. I'd prefer you actually reviewed the offer, but you've made your 10 gold, Du said simply. Why do you want the other dungeon dead? Quint asked, unable to contain his curiosity. I assume some of it is instinct. I don't think beings like us can tolerate being in proximity to each other, but mostly I understand how terrible disease can be. So as far as I'm concerned, fuck that plague rat and anyone like him, Duex said. Would killing him cure the diseases he's made? Quint asked. Quint, stop asking fucking questions. We'd like to leave, Pip shouted. Fuck you, if something makes them then I want it dead too, Quint shouted back, surprised by his own anger. He'd been 10 and he didn't know what happened to his mother. Just that his father was coughing up bits of himself even as he still dragged himself to the copper mine to try and make a living. Nobody had noticed or cared much, plenty of miners coughed. His father had simply been one of the ones to be pulled out dead at the end of the shift. Scarlet cough had run rampant through the mining towns after that. I don't know if he made it but I can look it up. As for his death curing it, I have no idea, Du said. She made a gesture and suddenly the room got a great deal quieter. Quint looked back toward the other daggers and found them gone. Back up in the sunshine, like they wanted, and free to go with one exception. You know that guy is freakishly good at climbing, she added, looking up. There was a banner hanging on the wall and in the rafters above it a flash of quivering silver. Argent, doing his best to ball up and hide. He disappeared too. Also free to go, Quint said, not really believing it. You won't be able to betray me due to the contract, so I have no reason to keep anyone against their will, Du said with a shrug. She headed back to her throne but the room changed around them, becoming smaller. She sat at a desk with 2 seats in the modest-sized chamber. I accepted that I might fail when I decided to be honest. So why be honest? Quint asked, still unable to keep his curiosity in his pants. Because I don't really enjoy lying and doing it more than strictly necessary will get out of control very quickly for an operation like this. So I'm going to offer you a deal, you'll review it, and you'll think about it then accept or refuse it, Du said, like it was simple. As if anything about the situation could possibly be. Fine, Quint said, sitting down across from her. If nothing else he was going to hear her out. Chapter 198. Choices. It took an hour for Jared's mind to do anything useful after the encounter with the dungeon master. An hour in which he learned that Du had spoken true, they couldn't reveal her secret to anyone. It hadn't stopped them from trying, floundering about in a panic as they found they simply couldn't speak the words. They'd all tried, all but Quint who hadn't come back with them. Quint who'd made the mad decision to actually listen to the cursed thing. Now they were all on the village green, their things packed for the road. It was time to face the facts. Quint's dead, we take our things and go, Jared said finally. Truthfully, he had no idea if the other man was or not, and it didn't matter. He'd not come back and they had no reason to stay longer than they already had. Cord and Argent nodded at that, but not Pip. He'd been strangely quiet for the most part despite joining in with them to try and warn the townsfolk. Quint said this whole place was strange, Pip said after a moment. A declaration that saved Jared from Cord and Argent's expectant looks. They were waiting on a destination that Jared did have. And now we all know it's very much worse than just strange, Jared agreed. It wasn't often that Pip seemed to be in a thoughtful mood, but it always meant trouble. Right, but he was always talking about the buildings and things. I was just thinking it's the people who are stranger than that. They're so strong and, there are hardly any children here, Pip said. Does it matter? Cord demanded. It does if they all belong to her, Pip said finally. Jared felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Du had a man, Henry, and he was strong to say the least. The idea that he'd taken up with her as part of a deal made a kind of sense. More so than him not noticing the strangeness of her. So what, they'll fight us leaving? Argent asked, shaking slightly. They haven't yet, Pip pointed out. So what? Cord asked. We're bound by the deal and maybe she really is too, Pip said, chewing on his lip. Fuck's sake, why does that matter? Cord demanded, looking at the end of his patience. Because if she can't hurt us then I've got 10 fucking gold I'm going to spend before we leave, Pip said, standing resolutely and heading for the shops. You've lost your fucking mind, Jared said flatly. Fuck you. I've never seen better gear or prices, I'm getting a horse, Pip shot back with a nearly manic cheerfulness. He nearly walked into Quint who appeared out of the thin air. Oh fuck no. Pip shouted, dagger out and slashing on instinct. The knife bounced off something none of them could see. A good thing for Quint it had been going for his throat, Pip wasn't one to try and disable an opponent. Easy. Quint said. He's immortal. Cord asked, looking around to the group in bewilderment. No, I just know some proper magic now. It's a shield spell, Quint supplied flatly. There was a long pause as Quint put a hand to his throat, rubbing at it. Probably an instinctive reaction since there wasn't so much as a welt on him. Like covering your junk when someone else got one in the sandbags. Did you make another deal? Jared demanded. Yeah, Quint replied. Jared let out a sigh. Maybe Pip had a point and Du was bound by the contract and would let them go. They might even be safe once they got out of the valley. Only, like she said, she could act through contractors. You're out then, Jared said flatly. He didn't want to take the chance that the man would turn on them. They were all friends and it wasn't often that any of them turned on each other. Even then the worst of it was usually some cussing and a fight. People had left the daggers over things like that, but they'd done so alive. Jared intended to keep the streak up. Fuck you too, Jared, Quint said, looking shocked then disgruntled. He turned on his heels and headed for the boarding house without another word. A bit of wetness in his eyes didn't escape notice though. Is he, just leaving? Cord asked. Looks that way, Pip agreed. They all watched him go and Jared felt a very powerful moment of conflict. He can do actual magic now, Jared said. He knew exactly nothing about it, but Pip didn't pull a punch. He'd gone for the kill only for the knife to fall short of the mark. That had to be proper magic like Quint had said. Don't even think about that. You didn't even want to stay long enough to go shopping, Pip spat. Jared gave a little start, not expecting his tone or expression to give anything away. Yeah, but... Jared trailed off, his mind racing. The fear that had gripped him earlier was still there, but now it was competing with a growing sense of curiosity. Pip grabbed Jared's arm, his fingers digging in painfully. We need to leave. Now, Pip growled. I say we at least talk to Quint, see what he says, Jared ventured. Sure, he's definitely in a talkative mood after my trying to kill him and you kicking him out, Pip spat. We'll apologize, Jared said, and it sounded lame to his own ears. He didn't honestly regret that, but it had been impulsive. Are you insane? We need to get as far away from here as possible. Pip countered. And go where? Jared shot back, surprising himself with the force of his words. Anywhere. Pip retorted. No, that's just it, there isn't anywhere. Not that I've been able to think of where we won't end up right back where we started, Jared said. The words were like pus flowing out of a boil, a putrid kind of relief. The fuck are you on about? Cord asked, confused rather than angry. Name me one place where we'd live as well as we have here for more than a year or two with the coin we have, Jared said flatly. Because there isn't one. We'll end up working and most of it will go to gear and we'll maybe do a bit better but we'll be back to scraping with our lives on the line. Argent, who had been silent until now, spoke up in a trembling voice. What if he's not him anymore? What if that thing changed him? Dunno, but he looked like he was going to cry so I doubt it, Cord offered. What? Argent and Pip asked together. What? He was halfway to pissing himself when Pip nearly did him and then all sad after Jared's bit. If they were going to change him you'd think they'd take some of the little bitch out of him first, Cord said with a shrug. You're an asshole, Argent said flatly. But am I wrong? Cord countered. Nobody replied. Jared was caught between knowing Cord was saying it like an ass but not actually wrong. If someone was going to take over Quint's mind then things like that would likely have been pretty high on the removal list. Back to the matter at hand, Jared said, not interested in debating if Quint was really still himself. That felt like a conversation he was well and truly out of his depth for. Anyone think of a place to go? Jared inquired. The rest of the daggers groaned at that. Fuck you, Cord said. But am I wrong? Jared asked, brows up in a questioning challenge. Jared, we're, at best, small-time mercs, Pip said. Right, so why are we suddenly fretting about dying? Least we might not do it broke this way, Jared said, tone lighter than he felt. That got him a collective groan but no argument as he set out for the boarding house. Chapter 199. Due consideration. Jared wasn't surprised to find Quint in a sulk in his room in the boarding house. The fuck off through the door was essentially expected. The situation was more delicate than he was used to dealing with though. Normally he'd just let the others settle themselves out however they saw fit. This time he knew he needed to say something. Look, I'm sorry I kicked you out like that. I'm scared and this is all fucking strange. We'll be in the guild hall if you want to talk, Jared offered. The lack of a reply wasn't surprising either. You want me to? Cord started to offer something. Jared immediately shook his head, battering down the door would not make things better. Everyone followed his lead thankfully and they went and drank until lunch, then continued on for a bit after that. None of them were properly drunk, just drunk enough to dull the day's horrors. Pip, you and anyone else who wants to may as well go shopping. He might not come talk to us today, Jared said, accepting that the wait might be long. Fine, Pip agreed. He took off immediately with Argent trailing after, though if they'd go the same way Jared couldn't guess. Would have been faster to kick the door in, Cord offered. Oh, you have door replacement money now? Jared asked. And somewhere else to stay when they kick you out. Cord looked like he was about to say something for a moment then thought better of it. He sighed then drank the rest of his ale in a single long pull. He certainly did have money, but Jared knew he wouldn't want to spend it replacing a door any more than he would himself. Ugh, this town needs a whorehouse, Cord said then stood up to go. Jared just tipped his drink at that. Alone and without anything in particular to do Jared sat and listened when one of the small folk turned up and started playing a merry set of pipes. Sealder, if he wasn't misremembering, one of the smart ones who worked in the library. While he listened he stared at the wall of registered adventurers. He couldn't read the names himself but he noticed a new tag with a light greenish-blue gemstone for a mage. It was probably Quint's and oddly the tag the stone was set in was still copper. Jared had thought the other man would move up to iron at the very least since he could do proper magic now. Though Quint hadn't had the class long so perhaps it would take time for him to earn it. May I join you? Someone asked. Jared looked up, surprised anyone had addressed him and gave a start when he found it was Henry. I don't think I have the means to refuse, Jared replied. Ah, things didn't go well this morning I see. Your words alone would be enough to banish me, I assure you, Henry replied, giving a little bow but not looking the least bit apologetic. Fuck's sake, just sit, Jared growled. He didn't know what Henry would say or do but was past beating around the bush about things. Say your piece. You haven't left so I assume you are considering Dwex's proposal. I thought IW would offer to answer any questions you might have. I've had my class changed already, Henry said. Jared sighed but still nodded. Did it hurt? Jared asked. No, it doesn't feel like anything until it's done, then, knowing how to use your abilities takes some getting used to. Mine were quite different from what I originally had, Henry explained. Really? Weren't you a warrior? I can't see a fighter being that different, Jared asked, surprised. He'd seen Henry demonstrate a few things in the training grounds. As a warrior himself he could see the other man's footwork was top-notch. Perhaps not, but I'm a chevalier and that is rather different. Also, I did start as a warrior but after becoming a fighter I prestiged to assassin originally, Henry said. Assassin? Jared asked, caught flat-footed by that admission. He'd have never figured the other man for one. There was a confidence in the way he moved he'd never noticed in thieves and the like. I didn't know you could do that, I assumed you'd have to be a rogue, Jared admitted. It wasn't something he'd ever given much though, heroic classes were rare enough. Prestige classes were something he'd only ever heard of. It's not exactly a common occurrence, though bards can apparently do so as well, Henry offered. Bards? Really? Jared asked, wondering if he was being teased. My thoughts were similar when I found out. Realis is one and it's interesting to see him fight, he uses a great deal more magic than someone who began as fighter or rogue would, Henry explained. Why choose Chevalier then? Jared asked, curiosity getting the better of him. He was having too much trouble wrapping his head around the idea Du could apparently give someone any class at all rather than just improving their existing one. Wondering why someone would choose a drastically different one given the opportunity was easier on his brain. He couldn't imagine doing that himself. Well, an assassin was simply what I was at the time. I had no love for it, while Chevalier was a dream of mine. So when asked, I chose my dream, Henry said, bowing his head slightly as he placed a hand to his chest. Well what was the cost? You're her man, but that couldn't have been all of it, Jared asked. He did think better of those words, but said them anyway. There wasn't a more elegant way to point out a man whoring himself for power. Not that Jared thought ill of Henry for it exactly, it was more just hard to fathom. Mostly in that a man would whore himself for a lot less than what Du had to offer. She had no reason to trade for what was easily had. Ah, you think I made a deal? That is a misunderstanding, I was in no position to do so, Henry with a dry laugh that ended in a piercing expression. She didn't have to give me anything and could have taken as she pleased from me. Yet she did as I asked simply because I had. So do not misunderstand my love for her or the fruits of an honest courtship as anything else. It will be slander in my ears, understood? Henry asked, a crackle of blue power dancing around him like small arcs of lightning. Right, fair, Jared said, doing his best not to piss himself. He'd heard of that kind of thing, mana becoming visible when those with heroic classes used skills. He'd just never seen it up close, even on a battlefield. They'd always been flashes of light in the distance, seeing the effect at arm's length he found he wasn't any less terrified of it. So you think I should make a deal, get power too, Jared said, hoping to move the conversation along. I don't honestly care what you do. It's a good opportunity in my eyes, but that hardly matters. Take your time and think it over, Henry said before getting up without ceremony. Seriously, that's all you meant to say? Jared asked, surprised. He'd expected threats or cajoling, not a chat and a reminder to mind his manners. It's not my life on the line, so what more could I say? My only advice would be to review the deal, then leaving after a few days if you don't take it. Du will find others easily enough, Henry said then gave a little bow before turning and simply leaving. Left on his own again Jared realized he actually hadn't gotten a look at the deal yet. He'd been a bit busy trying to escape while Quint was talking with Du. Not that it would have mattered then even if she'd shown it to him. That felt less like a mistake and more like bad timing. You're seriously still here? Quint asked. He was now the second person to catch Jared off guard in fewer hours. Everyone is, Jared replied, looking up. Quint looked much the same as he had the morning, if a bit red and puffy around the eyes. Why? Quint asked flatly. Look, you were fucking insane to talk to her back then, but not wrong. So I'm sorry for saying you were out, that wasn't fair when we hadn't even discussed anything yet, Jared offered. It was the best he could do for an apology. I supposed I was, Quint said with a sigh, sitting down at the table. Pip will make his own apologies later, Jared added. Sure he will, Quint said with a scoff, but it wasn't as angry as it could have been. Ah, he's not as bad as he'd like to be and I'll give him a kick and if he tries to get out of it, Jared said, intending to make good on his word. If they ended up parting, he'd rather they all still be on as good of terms as could be managed. Wouldn't mind watching that, Quint said, laughing. But really, why are you still here? Like I said, I was hasty earlier, we all were. You know, because it was fucking terrifying, but my better nature is now reminding me that it's worthwhile to listen when there's money to be made, Jared offered, laughing at himself. Pretty sure that's not your better nature, Quint said, laughing with him. Maybe not, but it's the best I've got. Besides, what's the point in running off to die broke elsewhere when I could die rich right here? Jared asked. It's really not that bad. I mean, yeah, we might well die, but the deal is to get us strong enough that we might succeed, Quint said. Which doesn't really sound that great when I say it aloud. No, it really doesn't, Jared agreed. But if you wouldn't mind, read me the deal so the rest of us can think about it. You sure? Quint asked. Fuck no, but do it anyway, Jared said, and they laughed together. Chapter 200. Roguish Delights. It took a day for the daggers to get past the initial pant-wetting stage of fear and read the deal. A remarkably short period of time, all things considered. After that came a surprisingly robust negotiation over the next week. Jared couldn't read, but the man had experience making deals and was shrewd about it. Though they weren't comfortable around me anymore, they did agree to meet me in person for the final signing. I debated a little about which form and decided to split the difference. As do I met them at the town hall, but once we were inside I assumed my natural form. The change obviously made them more nervous, but it wasn't as if they'd been happy and calm in the first place. I did it mostly because it felt more honest to me than putting on a friendlier appearance while we went over the final offer. It also didn't appear to matter much in the end. They reviewed the offer with Quint's help and agreed. So should we call you mistress after this, Jared asked. He wasn't exactly talkative, but a trickle of nervous chatter had been flowing from him since he first arrived. Pip was looking around shiftily for exits, Cord was glaring at the tabletop like he wanted to break it, and Argent just looked like he wished he was anywhere else. 42 if you want to use my personal name, so long as we're in private. Do on the surface or in town, I mean, or if others are around, I offered. I didn't really care about being called mistress and let the dungeon denizens do what they felt most comfortable with. I didn't see a reason not to do that with the daggers too. Fuck, I wasted some coin buying things going by this, Pip muttered to himself. He couldn't read, but he knew numbers and had been staring a hole in the pay and equipment section. You hardly need to worry about money in the valley. You'll be getting bespoke equipment shortly and your room and board is covered. I'll do my best to make things comfortable during your stay, I offered. Pip gave a start, like he hadn't thought he could be heard. Nobody else seemed surprised though, so it wasn't like I'd needed super hearing. Oh, then can we add on a request for a whorehouse? Cord asked sarcastically. Ha, him I like, Chris called down from the rafters. Everyone else gave a start while I was just pinching the bridge of my nose. Like an absolute brat he dropped down onto the table and kicked Pip in the chest hard enough to topple the man and his chair backwards. Pathetic, Chris laughed. Christopher! I shouted, scruffing him through his illusion by his spine. What? He's a thief, but he's shit. He had plenty of warning, should have cut my legs out from under me, Chris said, unfazed. Bastard! Pip yelled, getting up and lunging toward the table with his knives out. Don't kill him, I said as I let go of Chris. I got a snort of derision in response. My instinct was to defuse the situation, but I ignored it. I'd agreed to let the trainers handle their respective students how they saw fit. I hadn't expected the rogues to elect Chris though. Honestly, I'd expected Realis, he'd seemed interested in the daggers. Pip grabbed at Chris' legs and got nothing for his trouble but a kick in the face. He was tenacious though and stabbed blindly even as he was forced back. Chris just hopped back off the table, then rolled under it to come up next to Pip. Chris hardly dodged once they were on even footing, just narrowly avoiding Pip's wild slashes. There was also something strange about him, a kind of smokiness to his appearance I'd never seen before. Without warning, a weak double appeared like an afterimage and Pip stabbed it. The illusion wouldn't have fooled anyone watching, but someone locked up in combat didn't have the time or distance to see through it. In what was probably a remarkable display of restraint for Chris, he caught Pip by the wrist and twisted until I heard a sickening crack. Ha, you really earned that copper tag, Chris taunted while Pip screamed. The other daggers were on their feet now, obviously going to join in, but Pip moved first. With surprising speed he jammed his knife into Chris's guts and stabbed him what must have been half a dozen times. The daggers stared, though if they were shocked by the violence of it or the fact Chris was still standing I couldn't tell. Something red was gushing from him that I knew fucking well wasn't blood because I'd forbidden him from playing with it after his last prank had ruined a perfectly good couch in the guild. Just fucking realize you're dead, Pip growled. He'd stood up to glare in confusion at Chris. The brat looked down at himself and then played shocked as he put his hands to the seeping red. Oh shit, that was my favorite shirt, Chris said in horror that morphed into amusement. But I'm well aware I'm dead. Chris, I started. I didn't even finish the admonishment as he dropped his illusion of life. So have a drink on me, friend, Chris said, reaching into his shirt. He pulled a punctured wineskin out of his hips and tossed it and something metallic to Pip. You've earned it, and a promotion, Chris said, laughing. He took a can of chaos beverage out of himself to offer a toast with. I didn't even know where to start in terms of what to yell at him about. My letting him mess with Pip complicated the compiling of the list a little. A list I forgot about as Pip raised up the skin and then took a swig, more wine sloshing on him than getting in his mouth. Fuck's sake, drink the potion there on the ground next to you to fix your wrist. And Chris, you let him, I ordered. Pip didn't have to obey me but still did as I asked, picking up the arm-shaped bottle. It wasn't large but intricate, the glass forming tendons and muscle while the empty cavity was the shape of the bones. Boo, you're no fun, Chris said. And you weren't supposed to show them your true form, I reminded him. I hadn't said it was forbidden, so that was just a tiny bit my fault, but not enough to get him off the hook. Oh come on, they know about you. They might as well know about the rest of us, it's going to be boring if we have to pretend to be squishy and mortal, Chris countered, more than a hint of a whine in his tone. The rest of you? Jared asked, looking like he didn't want to. Chris is a skeleton, one from the dungeon. He can move around in the valley because it's part of my domain, I explained. And he's not the only one. Jared prompted. No. None of the Lepusan are, but the town folk aside from those living on the farm are, I admitted. Lying would just cause more problems later. This was a significant wrench in my plans to ease the daggers into the additional layers of weirdness that came with knowing my secret, but not one I could do anything about. Not short of time travel at any rate. Fuck. My wrist feels fine now, Pip said in awe. He was moving it about to test the range of motion. See? I can't die, you can be mended, it was all just a bit of sport, Chris offered. So don't plan on being a bunch of whiny twats about training. Have fun with it, because we will. Okay, everyone else, head to the training grounds to meet the people who'll be training you. Chris, stay here, I ordered. The daggers didn't need encouragement and left, though they took the wineskin with them. Chris had his illusion back up, wine-stained shirt a sick parody of actual injury. Waste of a trick really, I placed its stem down to piss on him with but it was just kind of adorable how he kept going like that, Chris said once we were alone. Chris, I know what I agreed to, but that wasn't acceptable. He's too low level to learn from that kind of a beatdown. They're all level 2, I said, fully exasperated before we'd even really begun. I knew how Chris and Andrea did things and couldn't see that going over well with anyone not as driven as her. What's that got to do with me? Chris asked, looking baffled. You agreed to train him, I pointed out. Nua, Chris replied flatly. Then what the fuck was that? I asked. Just saying hello to the new fleshies, Chris replied with a grin. Chapter 201. Focus. Hayat could remember the day he was summoned and offered the choice to choose a name or take one of the mistress's choosing. He'd chosen one from his people that meant lion as a bit of a joke. He'd been a foundling blonde in a village of black-haired people. She hadn't questioned it beyond asking if it had a meaning, then let him pick his class. Since then he'd done his utmost to be useful or stay out of the way. Not that there was often much to do besides play at fighting in the Dungeon League as it was called. He'd liked it and the other games. They were an interesting way to pass the time while his mistress fortified her lair and drew new prey to her. It was why he'd chosen to teach the dog Kinlaw Darren Argent once the man had chosen to become a ranger. It was a way of paying back some of the grace he'd received from 42. The archery range echoed with the thud of arrows hitting targets. Hayat demonstrated the proper form for a quick draw and release, his movements fluid and precise despite his apparent age. He'd been 63 when he died of a bad winter cold alone in his hunting blind. He could have chosen to look younger but preferred to wear the full weight of his years. Speed is often as important as accuracy, he explained. A ranger must be able to respond quickly to threats. Arjun took his place, knocking an arrow with surprising grace. His first few shots were accurate, clustering near the center of the target. Hayat nodded approvingly, impressed by the seemingly natural ability granted by the class change. Excellent. Now, let's increase the difficulty, Hayat said, activating a mechanism that caused the targets to move erratically. Arjun's brow furrowed in concentration as he tracked the moving targets. His first shot flew true, striking near the bullseye. Not all of them landed so well, but there were few misses and his speed was good. I'll leave you to this for a bit, work your way through the full box while I'm gone, Hayat ordered. He left Arjun to his task, the ammo box filled with 100 arrows. In all honesty, he could have stayed, but he found the prospect boring. He'd seen enough to correct a few flaws in Arjun's form, but he was curious about something else. Hayat took a walk around the training grounds, spending a few minutes seeing how the other daggers were getting on. Jared was doing well, it seemed, though he was getting his ass handed to him by his instructor. The man was level-headed about it and learning on his feet. The big one, whose name Hayat couldn't remember, not as much. He'd started in medium armor with a round shield, but now was carrying a tower shield and in heavier armor than he'd started in. Hayat expected he'd be moved totally away from swords and to a maul soon. He was sturdy and relatively quick, but stronger than he was smart. A more intuitive weapon would suit him. Pip. He took a few minutes to stand and watch along with a group of other members of the Bone Brigade. Hayat had no idea why, but he was going at his instructor like a maidened bear. Baka's thistle was dancing around him with ease. He was one of the elves Hayat hadn't really gotten to know yet. They weren't flighty exactly so much as constantly on the move, unlike him. Amused but not interested enough to ask about what was going on, Hayat decided it was time to check back in. He wasn't exactly surprised to find that Arjun hadn't fired all the arrows yet, but how few were sticking out of targets was. He'd thought the other man would make it a good 2 or 3 quarters into them. It looked like he'd not quite managed a third. I'm not doing very well at this, Arjun observed. You're not good at paying attention, Hayat agreed. It was the third skill demonstration to go poorly for the same reason. The young man just couldn't seem to focus on his task, either getting distracted by some minutiae of it or something else altogether. Pip thinks I got dropped on my head as a pup, Arjun said matter-of-factly. Pip is an asshole, and tell him to fuck off if he talks to you like that again, Hayat said bluntly. Thinking it was one thing, saying it to hurt someone was another thing entirely. I'll be telling him that a lot then, Arjun said, laughing. Hayat considered if he should say something for a few moments, then tried to decide what exactly. The young man was affable but difficult to deal with in some respects. That wasn't really a flaw though. At least not so much of one that he should take shit for it. Mistress 42 checked you, there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to work on some things more than others, Hayat said after a pause. It was the only thing he could think to offer in terms of comfort. He'd thought he'd been born cursed, wrong-colored and abandoned even before his leg had gone lame. When 42 had fixed his leg, he'd thought she'd fix his appearance too, break whatever curse had caused it. She'd given him permission to alter his appearance however he liked, but told him there was nothing wrong with him. He'd likely inherited a distant ancestor's colors and his leg had probably been treated wrong. The too complete yet fractured story of his life banging around in Hayat's head agreed with that assessment. His parents had the local colors, but they'd been nobody special and hadn't angered any spirits or deities. He hadn't needed it to know the village healer was shit though, he'd known that when he was alive. It just felt like bad luck he'd even needed the man for what had started as a minor wound. Checked me? Arjun asked. Hayat was glad he didn't feel an urge to sigh anymore. He would have been doing every other breath otherwise. When she reset your class? Sometimes mortals and even skeletons have issues that she can fix. I had a bad leg because the bone healed wrong. She fixed it, Hayat explained. He knew the group had been informed as it was happening but accepted that Arjun's mind had wandered. You remember being alive, human? Arjun asked. That was something that hadn't come up before and Hayat weighed if he wanted to discuss it or not. Arjun waited on him, fidgeting a little but not making demands in a rare display of patience. Yeah, I was born and lived in a place called Simara in a little village that wasn't big enough to have a name of its own. Made it to the winter of my life as a bushman, Hayat offered, hoping that would be enough to sate the other man's curiosity. When something did catch Arjun's attention, it could wander again or become fixed for a time, and which it would be was unpredictable. I lived like that until I met Jared, Arjun offered cheerfully. Well, back to the lesson at hand. Let's get through the rest of your skills. After that I'll send you to the forest to put them to use and we'll see how you do, Hayat decided. He couldn't accompany the young man for that, 42's reach on the forest side was limited, but it was probably for the best. A ranger could work with a team but generally in a solitary capacity. They supported a group by hunting and trail finding until their skills were needed in combat. This next part I know you're suited to, but we'll take it from the beginning all the same, Hayat said. He demonstrated the proper stance for tracking, his body low and balanced. When following a trail, you need to engage all your senses, he explained. Look for bent grass, broken twigs, and disturbed soil. Listen for unusual silence or animal alarms. Smell for any lingering scents. Arjun nodded eagerly, mimicking Hayat's posture. His heightened senses made him a natural, quickly picking up on subtle clues Hayat had planted. However, as they moved deeper into the training grounds, Arjun's focus began to waver. What's that smell? He asked suddenly, nose twitching. Focus, Arjun, Hayat reminded gently. Does it tell you something about our circumstances or quarry? Oh, right, Arjun said, shaking his head. It's sweet. Like berries, but not quite, and there's smoke. Good, and what does that tell you? Hayat prompted. Someone's smoking something fun, Arjun said happily. Hayat couldn't help but chuckle at that. He was right, Cord was taking a break on the other side of the training ground and had a pipe out. He couldn't smell it himself though he could see the man smoking. It tells you someone is smoking nearby, which means a clumsy fellow might be hunting too, or maybe an encampment is close. What it is matters, but what it means in this moment is more important, Hayat reminded him. They continued, with Arjun showing impressive skill in moments of concentration. He correctly identified a deer trail and even spotted a hidden snare trap Hayat had set as a test. But every few minutes, his attention would drift to a bird call or an interesting rock formation. You have the makings of an excellent tracker, Hayat observed as they finished the exercise. Your instincts are strong. Now we need to work on maintaining your focus for longer periods. Arjun's tail wagged at the praise, but his eyes had already wandered to a bird flying overhead. Hayat sighed inwardly, reminding himself that he couldn't die of frustration since he was already dead anyway. Chapter 202. Determination. Pip knew, with some clarity, that he was getting his ass handed to him the entire first day of training. Something which wasn't his instructor's fault since he was the one who'd insisted on sparing. Sparing which he'd made a mess of by just attacking like an idiot. Rogue and thief were pretty similar in terms of abilities. He'd been better at things as a second-level rogue than he had been a fourth-level thief, but not much was outright new. The exception being sneak attacks, but he was apparently shit at those. You done? His teacher asked. The elven man had been patient after a fashion. Why yet? Pip managed. He was exhausted and laying in the dirt on the flat of his back where he'd last been knocked down. I heard about what happened, what Chris did. So I thought you might need to blow off some steam. Tomorrow though, we start the actual training, his teacher added. Well, that was the most recent thing, Pip grumbled to himself. His teacher hummed questioningly. Pip started, not expecting to be heard. He'd forgotten that the long-eared elf folk tended to have a large range. Just a lot has been going on, Pip said carefully. Don't worry too much about what 42 will ask of you. She's honest, after a fashion, his teacher said, shrugging. After a fashion? Pip asked, eyebrow shooting up. She won't ask more than she said she will and will keep the deal, his teacher said. Looking a little uncomfortable. Now go, sleep or whatever it is you do. Do you mean as a mortal or a human? Pip asked. Mortal. He'd been called that quite a bit since finding out about the less than natural nature of most of the locals. Both, honestly. I knew of humans, but I'd never actually met one when I lived, his teacher said with another shrug. Rare, were we? Pip asked, having to wonder where the man had lived for that to be true. Not as such, we just didn't mix much, his teacher replied. That seemed to be the end of his interest, or possibly patience's, because with that he started walking out of the arena. Finally too tired to keep your tantrum up. Jared called from the railing. He was eating an apple and looking smug. Wasn't a tantrum, Pip shot back. I suppose a tantrum would have been more dignified, Jared conceded. Oh, fuck you, Pip said. He burned up more energy than he should have just sitting up. Every bit of him ached, but none of the damage was serious going by the fact no potions had appeared. Jared, being Jared, helped him back to the boarding house despite him cursing at him. Pip wasn't a fan of the bath, but being covered in dirt he yielded when led to it. He even managed not to complain about it. It was strange, having the option to be clean as often as he liked. Even those who lived in a town rather than rough like him usually didn't go to the trouble of baths more than every other week or so. Though he couldn't help but wonder if free access to hot water wouldn't change that pretty quickly. The way it was soothing his aching body had him pretty well sold. It was one of a number of things he'd found uncomfortably comfortable about the town even before he knew who'd made it. Veritable luxury had for the price a low-end mercenary could afford. He should have realized it was a trap well before having it shoved in his face. After the bath, Pip ate a light dinner in his room and fell asleep quickly. In the morning he felt well enough and was at the training ground when he'd agreed to be. "Pip," his teacher said. "Sir," Pip replied. He was fairly certain the other man had offered a name, he just couldn't remember it for the life of him. "I'm Bacchus Thistlephalanges," Bacchus offered for what was definitely the second time. "Bacchus will do, I'm not a sir." "Yes Bacchus," Pip managed. "We'll be doing drills now, Pip," Bacchus replied flatly. Pip did as he was told for once and kept it up for several days. He wouldn't exactly call Bacchus a great teacher, but the man would wait for him to pick up a skill to his satisfaction before moving on at least. It was just the sort of leaden resignation in his manner that kept Pip from feeling it was patience or goodwill. On the fourth day Pip spent some of his rest period trying to work something out. The ability or trick Chris had used to fool him with during their fight. He wasn't arrogant enough to think Chris had needed it to win, he'd been badly outmatched and knew it. He'd just been too angry to care at the time. Now he wanted to be able to copy whatever it was. It would definitely be handy in a fight. "What exactly are you doing?" Bacchus asked after a while. "That little bastard could do this smoky thing, made me think he was in one place when he was in another," Pip explained. "It's a special assassin's ability, you won't be able to learn it yet," Bacchus said flatly. "Everyone makes choices as they progress and you're still a rogue for the moment. Don't focus on things you won't have until you get high enough level to prestige." "I should still train for it though," Pip countered. "Once you've mastered the basics of your current class, yes. Until then, try and focus on our lessons rather than worrying about the future," Bacchus said. Pip had thought at first that Bacchus didn't particularly like teaching because of his manner. That maybe he was just doing it to appease his mistress. That idea lasted until he'd seen the elven man among the other skeletons. He'd stayed just as plodding and expressionless among them. Like everything was a vaguely annoying chore he was resigned to. "All right, but I'm sick of drills. Can we spar or do something more hands-on?" Pip asked. He knew he'd fucked up on the first day, but he'd behave this time. Particularly since he was painfully bored. "Not until you've mastered the basics," Bacchus said flatly. "You're shit at this," a familiar voice taunted. Like a fucking ghost Chris stepped around Pip, seemingly materializing from the shadows themselves. "Fuck you," Pip said flatly. "Wasn't talking to you, he's the shit one," Chris said, gesturing at Bacchus himself. "Teaching isn't my strong suit," Bacchus agreed. "Oh, no. You're probably doing fine at that. Drills and such are probably very teacher-y," Chris said cheerfully. "I meant at actually being an assassin." Pip had been mid-comeback when the conversation initially shifted. Now he was left with a finger pointed in his mouth in a little o of surprise. He closed his mouth and took several steps back, not sure what the pair were going to do. "Well, I'm sure your extensive experience gives you insight into such things," Bacchus replied. Bacchus was visibly older in a kind of not actually old way than Chris, so that was probably an insult. Pip got himself well out of range but close enough to watch if the fight he was hoping for actually happened. He didn't like Chris and seeing him getting a whooping would be satisfying in the extreme. "It does, you fight like a soldier, and that is shit for actual killing," Chris said, laughing. Pip almost said something but then realized he wasn't sure if Chris was right or not. Soldiers killed a lot of people after all, but that was usually in groups. "I was military trained," Bacchus replied flatly, the jib not seeming to land. "Switch classes, you'll be happier for it," Chris said. "That is none of your business," Bacchus said, his usual even tone tainted with anger. It wasn't much, but the hint of emotion coming from him seemed like shouting in rage from someone else. "Bet they called your lot something fancy. Gave you uniforms to wear and made you feel like you were really part of it all. Only you weren't, assassins don't get medals or awards," Chris sneered. You get told where to go and who to kill, and if you're lucky, you get to live a while longer. Maybe a pat on the head if your handler's a particularly sick fuck. You don't know anything about it, Bacchus countered. What's there to know? Military, royal, guild, they all get treated the same, Chris said with a little snicker. You two going to fight or fuck? An unfamiliar voice called. Pip turned to find a red-haired human girl leaning against the barrier that surrounded the training area. She looked about the same age as Chris but was clearly from better stock. What would you rather see, love? Chris asked, air humping as he sidled up to Bacchus' hip. He didn't make contact, Bacchus shoved him back, but Pip reconsidered where he was standing. He got behind the arena barrier, just to be safe. You, on time for training, bastard, the girl replied, sounding bored. Well, you heard the lady, Chris said, doing a false curtsy. The moment he turned to go, Bacchus lashed out, plunging a sword through the mouthy boy. It pierced his chest cleanly, too cleanly. It seemed like he hadn't stuck a wineskin in himself this time. Why exactly is everyone bent on ruining my good shirts? Chris asked, head turning around to an unnatural degree to look at Bacchus. The fight that followed definitely wasn't what Pip had been expecting. Bacchus had his share of abilities and was good, but like Chris had said, he was more of a fighter than an assassin in actual combat. It was honestly strange to watch, and if he hadn't seen the first neatly carried out execution strike he'd have assumed the man really was of a different class. Bacchus didn't get his sword back. Chris turned and being caught between ribs it was twisted from his hands. Bacchus switched to a shorter blade while Chris drew out and tossed aside the sword. He was empty-handed a moment when Bacchus struck again, but then his daggers were glinting as they exchanged rapid blows. TCH, he's off balance. Chris'll have him quick, the girl complained. Her eyes were riveted on the fight when Pip looked over briefly. His footwork seems solid to me, Pip countered. Not that, Chris got in his head, she said. Bacchus did something, started walking, but it left a seeming trail of vague after images of himself behind him. All of which swirled like smoke when Chris threw a handful of something out of a pouch. Iron shot by the sound they made hitting the barrier boards on the other side. That left only Bacchus himself standing, and Chris was on him in the next instance, grappling viciously. A knife pommel to the forehead ended the match with a sickening crack. The illusion dropped away, revealing the skeleton underneath as the bones seemed to crack and crumble, radiating outward from the shattered seal. Ha, fucker, Chris said, pleased with his victory. I thought Bacchus would do better than that, Pip offered tentatively. It wasn't like the man hadn't put up a fight. Still, instinct and class abilities combined to give Pip a feeling that it hadn't been the best the man could do. Like I said, he was off balance. Chris rattled him, then he didn't recover from his mistake with that first attack, the girl said. What mistake? Pip asked, confused. It had seemed like a pretty much perfect strike to him. That's how you kill a mortal like us, not a skeleton, she said, pointing at the last of the bones as they faded in violet light. Wait, so you're not one of the dungeon creatures? Pip asked, surprised. She seemed comfortable calling out to Chris, so he'd just assumed. Hey, I don't think you were this curious about me. Should I be offended? Chris asked, suddenly looming over the top of the barrier with his face in Pip's. Pip stumbled back and landed on his ass. What do I need to know about a rude bastard that you didn't already show me? Pip asked, temper getting the better of him. But is Bacchus dead? Pip realized he was probably asking about Bacchus a little late. Knowing the man was a skeleton had left him a bit indifferent to the idea of injury, and his rather dramatic fiery disintegration had been more interesting than alarming. That didn't mean he actually wanted the elven man gone though. What? Yeah, obviously. Skeletons don't typically walking around without the meat if the whole person is alive, Chris said, looking confused. I meant as a skeleton, that seemed kind of final, Pip clarified. Much as he didn't like Chris, he did want to know what happened. Oh, that. He'll be fine in a couple of hours, we respawn, Chris explained. But can't keep fucking time apparently, the girl growled. I'll be in the training hall. With that the girl turned and started storming off. Pip watched her go for a moment, fully expecting Chris to say something rude. Instead he found the young man scrambling over the barrier and landing in a heap in his haste to chase after her. Andrea! Hold on, come on! Chris called after Andrea as he chased after her. She kept a surprisingly long lead on him despite his desperation. That is the weirdest thing I've seen all day, Pip muttered. What would that be? Someone asked. Pip looked up to find Henry standing next to him, extending a hand up. Chris acting like an actual man instead of a fucking goblin, Pip admitted. Henry just laughed at that, pulling him to his feet easily. She is one of his few redeeming Q qualities, Henry offered. Pip dusted himself off, joining in on Henry's laughter. He's got more than one? Pip asked, not believing it. He's fond of dogs, Henry said. Pip laughed harder at that. So, you saw all of that then? Pip asked, curious what Henry had thought of the fight. Yes, which is why I came. Bacchus is the type to antagonize Chris, intentionally and otherwise, Henry explained. I'd hoped to prevent a disruption to your training today, but you will be assigned a new teacher. Because of Chris? Pip asked, surprised. Because Bacchus prestiged from fighter to assassin, not rouge. Assigning him to you was an oversight on my part, Henry clarified. Oh, I was wondering about that. Chris got a problem with soldiers? Pip asked. Nobody else had said anything about him, but it seemed like Henry knew him pretty well. Not as such. He takes issue with delusions of nobility, not one's method of killing, Henry explained. Oh, well. Fair, Pip said after a moment's thought. He couldn't say he thought much of people who thought killing was more than it was either. Not that he'd heard Bacchus say anything like that. Even if he had, he was going to weigh in on a personal grievance anyway. He was curious, but he'd judge Bacchus based on what he knew. He'll be all right though, Bacchus? Pip asked. Save for his ego, he will be fine, Henry assured him. Did you have any other questions? So, most classes can become assassins, but I should only learn from a rogue? Pip asked, wanting to clarify that point. If you were closer to prestiging, it wouldn't matter. As things stand, you'd benefit from more focus on your current class. Bacchus knows the basics, he had a level of rogue in life, but he won't be able to handle in-depth training, Henry offered. Ah, well, that makes sense, Pip conceded. He didn't really care that much who taught him, but he'd started to feel a bit comfortable with Bacchus. Still, he'd put up with feeling awkward for a few days if it meant getting stronger than he would have otherwise. I'll look forward to my new teacher, so long as it isn't Chris. Pip, I would never do something that cruel, Henry said earnestly. Chapter 203. Training Standards. Cord knew he wasn't anything special even after his class changed. Going from warrior to fighter wasn't that different. He was certainly stronger than before, could probably make it as a mid-tier mercenary with a bit more training, but it wasn't an earth-shattering change for him. Keep keen. Roxolana chided, hitting him hard upside the helmet. She and a couple others were moving around him, looking for openings and weaknesses to exploit. They'd alternate tactics, sometimes coming from the front, others splitting up for flanks. All of it was meant to help him get used to his armor's more restrictive field of vision. The weight had been easy to adjust to, the armor was light for full plate, and designed well enough not to be as restrictive as the cheap kind. Not that it was ever actually affordable, let alone cheap. Still, there was a huge difference between made to fit from spare bits like most had and made to order for you personally. Every few moments there was a dull metallic thud as a blow was landed. Some would ache, others wouldn't, but there wasn't a sting of a cutting injury. So long as he avoided letting one of them get in a more vital strike, the exercise would continue and he was getting better at guarding his weaknesses. How much fucking Cord stopped cursing as a chime went off. That sound signaled a break was incoming, but he kept fighting. He'd learned not to take for granted that the others would stop immediately the first time he'd let down his guard and got a kick in the back. 2 weeks in he was more vigilant than he would have been with outright demonic creatures. His attackers broke off and Cord was relieved to get to take his helmet off. Not bad, you didn't puke or faint this time, Cynthia said cheerfully. She went without armor or shield but was a deadly thing in her own right. She struck hard and fearlessly, and for all that his armor wasn't terribly restrictive for the type, she was a great deal faster and more nimble. Thanks, Cord said sarcastically. She just grinned and gave him a pat on the back, the scar on her face bunching oddly as she did. The thing he was having the most trouble with was honestly just how hot wearing all of the layers were. It was strange too, how it felt. He could probably have cooked an egg on his back from the sun beating down on the metal, but the inner layers were relatively cooler until he started fighting. That was when he felt like he was properly in an oven. His sweat would turn it cool again after a bit though. She's being honest. You've got the stats to handle it, but getting used to it, adapting, is something else, Roxolana offered. She patted Cord on the opposite side that Cynthia had. Without another word the pair of them got him under the arms and moved him under the shade of a shelter 42 had added along with a bench. Oh, that is better, Cord sighed. He helped himself to water while the two women perched on the barrier. They didn't need such things, and while he could use a potion to ease his training, he'd agreed when 42 advised against it. He needed to find his current limits and push as far past them as he reasonably could. He wouldn't improve properly if he didn't. The third one, Jeffrey, waved goodbye before climbing the barrier and heading off. Roxolana was his teacher, but who all joined her varied. They sat quietly for a while Cord just breathed. His training was hard, more physically demanding than the rest of the daggers, but Cord didn't mind. He was aware enough to realize he didn't have head for tactics or finesse. He'd gotten by with a sword, but the maul he'd been given suited him much better. The tower shield too, now that he was getting the hang of using it properly. It wasn't just a defensive item, it could be used as a weapon too, though it could be a bit unwieldy. Still, there had been a profound satisfaction the first time he'd managed to bash one of the skeletons with it straight into the barrier. They'd ended up having to respawn, and it had been the first of his real victories in training. So, aside from beat up, how do you feel? Roxolana asked. Fine, Cord said, the same answer he'd given the prior day and every one since he'd started training. How's being dead? Cord regretted the question immediately. He'd disliked being asked how he was doing, but it wasn't worth the beating he was probably going to get for being rude. It was just irritating to be asked that when he was doing his utmost not to think about anything other than what was happening in front of him. Pretty nice really. I don't get hungry or thirsty, never have to shit, Roxolana replied. Right. Cynthia chimed in, laughing. You don't miss it then, being alive? Cord asked, curiosity overriding caution. Being a street child and then a mercenary, Cord hadn't had much to do with women unless he paid for the privilege. He'd also never had coin enough nor interest in anything more than a tumble to get himself off. His understanding of them was they were generally more noisy than men during the day, but quieter at night, and nosy. Like asking how he was every day. He didn't honestly know what to make of them beyond that or understand why they were curious about him. Though in fairness he supposed the fact they were female was the least of their differences at the moment. Not really. A few things would be nice to have back, but I wouldn't trade feeling no pain for them. The poets are full of shit or never starved or suffered a gut wound, carrying on about how it's important to suffer to know joy, Roxolana said, shrugging. Ugh, yours sound like a bunch of fucking idiots. Ours had the sense to sing about drinking and fucking to forget it, not praise it, Cynthia said, nose scrunched in distaste. Silence lapsed for a while Cord drank a bit more water and enjoyed his break. He still wasn't going to answer if they asked, but truthfully he was essentially fine. He didn't like the fact he was contracted with a dungeon, but the conditions weren't bad. It was about as uncomfortable as working with a noble, though why was slightly different. Well, breaks up, Roxolana said. Cord didn't question it until he noticed someone approaching the training ground. Cabin Lenar, a fighter who'd prestige to Berserker. I take it I offended you, Cord said bleakly. He'd made the mistake of asking for a match-up with him out of curiosity and needed 3 healing potions to be put back together again afterwards. What? Why would you think no? This was planned from the beginning. You're fairly used to the armor and heat now, so the main thing will be building up awareness of your injuries and pain tolerance. It's why Cynthia has been assessing you. We wanted to make sure you were ready to move on. Tanking isn't for the faint of heart, Roxolana explained. We muzzled him this time though. I'm not a bitter myself, so I really wasn't expecting him to just tear into you like he did that first time, Cynthia added. Why would you be? Cord asked, caught off guard. That's the spirit, don't assume all berserkers are alike, Cynthia said, grinning. Cord didn't know what to think of that for a moment, when the realization kicked in. She was one too, just like Cabinla. Now, remember, there's no such thing as a cheap shot nor shame in a fight. Piss yourself or whatever you need to do to keep going. It ends when you kill him or we see a serious potion drop for you, Roxolana reminded him. Advice she'd given at various times but not all at once before. I think I'd be better off fighting a bear, Cord said, meaning it honestly. Depends on the bear, Cynthia said, giving him a pat before climbing over the barrier. Roxolana was already on the other side and they both flashed him encouraging smiles and thumbs up. He looked back to find Cabinla throwing himself at the barrier on the opposite side like an enraged boar. It wouldn't take him long to break through, and Cord could see the leather harness with some kind of metal mouth cover. With cold clarity he understood that just how brutal his training was going to be going forward, offense or not. Well, fuck this and fuck me, Cord said, getting his helmet on and drawing his maul. He was going to go down fighting even if he did piss himself. Chapter 204. Checking in. Jared had been checking in with everyone else as they trained for the past month and a half. They'd all been doing well, though at what exactly varied. Watching Cord's training had honestly been a bit difficult. He'd never seen a man take that much punishment and live. Even knowing a potion would set it to rights, it had been hard to see a friend endure that. Still, Cord had insisted he wanted to continue and Jared respected that. Argent was off in the woods with his teacher, but seemed quite happy with the arrangement. Quint training was something he couldn't make heads nor tails of, not even when the other man tried to explain it. His eyes would glaze over at the very word formula now, let alone the math involved. Pip was learning, and his way of going about it was less worrisome now. He'd claimed down or whatever he needed to do, and his new instructor seemed to know what they were about. Phalanges Bloom was an elven woman with a pretty kind of grey color to her that showed hints of other colors in the light. Jared made sure to keep clear of her or be as polite as he knew how when he couldn't. He fancied her and she didn't have a title to complicate things like Dawn did as guild master. Still, given that she was a skeleton, he wasn't about to try his luck. Breaks up, his current trainer called. Icarus Clavicle Emberheart was a halfling fighter who'd taken over for Jeffrey Allen, a human fighter. Something which was normal in Jared's case, his trainer changed almost daily once he got the basics down. From there things had shifted from simple combat techniques to learning how to fight other classes and different beings like the halflings and elves. Right, Jared called, drawing his sword. His buckler was part of the armor so that it didn't come off. He'd have had to take it all off to remove it, and he wasn't about to do that for a short break, no matter how tempting. He didn't have it as bad as Cord, who was sporting full plate, but his mix of chain and plate was its own kind of heavy and hot. His helmet's padded underlayer went on next with the helmet last. Ready to go, Jared stepped back into the training area and found himself immediately under assault. Icarus was fast, hitting light but precisely from a low angle that was hard to deal with. Jared gritted his teeth as he parried another of Icarus's lightning-fast strikes. The halfling's speed was incredible, and Jared found himself struggling to keep up. He'd made significant progress over the past weeks, but facing opponents so different from what he was used to still threw him off balance. Keep your guard up, Icarus barked, darting in to land a sharp blow on Jared's thigh. Jared hissed in pain but forced himself to focus. He'd learned that against smaller, quicker opponents, patience was key. He waited, fending off every blow he could while tracking Icarus's movements, looking for a pattern. He found it after another stinging hit, a slight hesitation before each lunge. Jared feinted left, then brought his sword down in a swift arc as Icarus committed to his attack. The halfling barely managed to dodge, eyes widening in surprise. Better, Icarus nodded approvingly. Now, let's see if you can do it again. Jared almost managed it a few more times, but the gap in skill remained even if he was improving. Even when he did manage a blow of any kind, there was a fair chance it would be parried. Despite the size difference, Icarus was stronger than Jared would have thought if he hadn't already experienced it. Finally, Jared misstepped and caught a blow to the knee that put him in the dirt. Icarus didn't relent, the hits coming down like a landslide, finding gaps and digging into sensitive flesh beneath armor. The halfling wasn't looking to bruise like someone else in a spar would, he was going to wound. Fuck! Jared shouted in pain. A little chime sounded then and Icarus let up, not out of kindness but rather because a healing potion had appeared. Break time, Icarus declared. Jared didn't respond, rolling over to pick up the small bottle and bolting it down as quickly as he could. He'd need to clean his armor padding later, he could feel the subtle squelch of where blood had saturated it. Really, he'd have changed it for fresh but knew that wasn't really acceptable in training. It was supposed to be as much like a real fight as could be safely managed, and that meant putting up with discomforts. That being stabbed in the kidney and bleeding out only rated as a discomfort was something best not dwelt on for the moment. Jared scraped himself up out of the dirt and made his way over to the rest bench. It wasn't fancy, but the shade it offered was divine after fighting in the sun. You're doing better. Just need to remember to use your reach advantage, but don't overextend, Icarus offered along with a cup of water. Right, it's difficult to not fuck it up, but I get what you mean, Jared agreed. Well, I'm rather obviously trying to make it hard on you. I've got a lot of experience fighting people bigger than me, Icarus said simply. Were you a mercenary or maybe a prize fighter? Jared asked, curious. Sometimes the skeletons would talk about their past in the guild, sometimes not. The stories were always interesting though, and he wouldn't mind hearing about what a halfling's life was like. He'd never even heard of them before coming to the valley. Nah, I was just a farmer till some bastard prince decided to pitch a war in the middle of my village. Grew dreamweed and raised sheep, Icarus offered. Set the odd fire too. Set fires? Jared asked, confused by that part. 42 has a fancy word for it, arsonist. Kept it to abandoned buildings and such till that prince came along. Fought with a rival in our fields because they were convenient and didn't mind how many of us were caught up in the crossfire, so I went and burned down his palace and the city around it, Icarus explained. The city? Jared asked in surprise. Not immediately, mind you. I was angry enough to hunt his men along with some other survivors for a bit, but they eventually lost the stomach for it, Icarus added. Well. You burned a city? Jared asked, not able to get past that part. Right? Lot of work to do that, but I was sick in the head. Not that I don't still like fire, I just don't think it talks to me anymore, Icarus explained. Oh, Jared said, not sure what else he could offer but a noise to confirm he'd listened. Suppose that wasn't what you were expecting, Icarus commented with a wry grin. And not really, Jared admitted. We were all evil in life, so most of our stories aren't exactly full of flowers and kindness. Though I'll say I deserved ending up punished more than most for what I did. It's different here though. I wouldn't say most of us are better people exactly, but we have more choices than before and fewer needs, Icarus offered with a shrug. That makes a difference, fewer needs? Jared asked. Definitely, there's hardly a reason to fight about anything in our case. We mostly do it out of boredom now, Icarus offered. Jared just nodded, the thought having crossed his mind before if not quite so clearly. Someone who didn't experience pleasure from food or comforts wouldn't see a reason to fight over them. Or at least not a serious one. Some people were just selfish dicks no matter their circumstances, so why people would fight would change. That's a lot to think about, and I don't have the mind for it, Jared decided after a few moments. Can't say I do either, Icarus agreed, laughing. So, what happens tomorrow? Nobody's been willing to tell me who I'm training with, Jared asked. Normally the week was planned out in advance, but nobody had seemed to know anything beyond the second day and his training with Icarus. Ah, that's because you're not really training tomorrow. On your own anyway. You've gotten good enough that we're putting you back with Argent, Cord, and a few of us to do some group tactics training. Pip and Quint will join in once they finish up, Icarus explained. Really, that should be interesting, Jared said, liking the idea. It had been a while since they'd trained together. It would be good to really see how much everyone had changed. Right? Bit past time in my opinion too. It's not like you'll be up against a dungeon that honors duels after all. You'll all need to learn to work together now, Icarus said. Time to get back to training too. Up with you. Right, the dungeon, Jared said, mood instantly plummeting. He had regrets, but not one strong enough to try and get out of his contract with 42. That didn't make reminders about what he was going to have to do pleasant though. He got up like he was told, willing to continue if not exactly pleased. Buck up, that's a while off yet. Your only real concern right now is learning as much as you can and the fact I'm coming for your other kidney, Icarus said with a grin. I'm having trouble picturing this being the nice version of you, Jared replied flatly. I said sort of better, not nice, Icarus corrected. With that the fighting resumed and Jared didn't have a spare thought for anything but trying not to end up gutted by the halfling menace in front of him. Something which might have been a fairly pleasant distraction if Icarus hadn't been serious about going for his other kidney. He was though. Chapter 205. Math Magical. Quint wasn't surprised when his training first started to find himself spending most of his time in the library. It took nearly a month for him just to choose and transcribe all of his spells into a tome. A process complicated by the fact he had to memorize them. 42 had altered his stats, whatever they were exactly, and in the process increased his mental capacity in some respect. All of that made it easier than before, but not actually easy. Honestly, the bigger win was how rapidly he achieved literacy. Being able to read on his own without too much difficulty let him study on his own after his lessons, and that was key to getting better. Despite knowing his role was different than before, Quint couldn't help feeling like he was getting off easy a month and a half in. All of the other daggers were going through obviously grueling combat training. Particularly Cord, the poor bastard, but he wasn't even doing laps or anything. It irked him since he'd actually been pretty good with the short sword he'd relied on when his limited spells ran out. Reasonably it wasn't how he'd be fighting going forward, at least if things went well, but he didn't like the idea of being a burden if the worst happened. There were other kinds of casters after all, ones who could engage more directly, but he'd always fall short of asking about the option. It was childish, but he'd always wanted to be a proper mage, and the idea of giving that up for something more practical was more than he could bear. Quint sighed, leaning back in his chair. He'd been seated at one of the dungeon library's long tables for he wasn't sure how long. He felt stiff and irritable, which wasn't helping with the feeling that he should be doing more than sitting on his ass. "Well, your handwriting is better," someone commented. Quint nearly startled out of his chair. A skull was hovering just above his shoulder. Flinching away, he found himself looking at the sorcerer he'd only really seen at a distance. He was an absolute nutter according to the wizards teaching him. He refused to change his class despite his blood magic not really working. "Better? You've seen it before?" Quint asked, surprised. He was fairly certain they hadn't even said hello. He'd have remembered given the man's strangely intense pinkish jewels. "I've reviewed your work for errors. I left the red marks," he explained. Quint's mouth dropped open a little and he was pretty close to cussing. He closed it silently though. More than one morning he'd come in to find his papers covered in red ink and insults. It had taken him days to figure out what even half of those notes meant. Only stubbornness had kept him trying. He'd wanted to prove his mystery critic wrong. He hadn't been able to, not even once. "You're a sorcerer though, doesn't your magic work differently?" Quint asked, wondering if he'd missed something. Even his instructors hadn't been able to say much about the notes other than they weren't necessary to understand just to cast. "No, how I construct them is the same. How I empower them is different," the sorcerer explained. He took Quint's paper from in front of him and walked around the short table to take a seat across from him. "The same is true for all magic users. Bards form the constructs through sound and movement, but ultimately that is only an aesthetic difference. They cast the same silence spell that you do, for instance." While the man talked, he took a pen and was marking all over Quint's spell. The one he'd been working on learning to draw correctly and memorize before he added it to his tome. "That doesn't seem likely?" "I mean," Quint took out his tome and turned to the spell in question. The array and instructions took up a full page along with a brief list of the focus and consumables involved. Just an owl's feather in this case, and it was reusable. "How do you sing this?" "Sealder, how would you go about casting this?" the man called out. Quint followed his gaze and was surprised to find one of the small folk librarians placing books on a high shelf. The pumpkin-eyed man wasn't using a ladder, just standing on the narrow empty ledge of the shelf itself. Unlike the pink-jeweled skeleton, the small folk man was wearing an illusion of life and a colorful mix of patchwork clothes. Without a word, Sealder hopped down and jogged over, tail bobbing behind as he did. He was quite enough that Quint felt he didn't often have need of such a spell. "This? You have to dance with this kind of thing. It's too hard to keep the right rhythm if you can't hear your voice or instrument," Sealder said after a moment's study. "Yeah, but you couldn't cast it using this spell itself, right?" Quint asked, brows furrowing. "Not immediately, I'd have to work out the choreography, but most of my spells started like this." The mistress wasn't really able to get a hold of anything so handy as a tome. "Bards usually apprentice, though sometimes there might be a school for learning the basics of your instruments," Sealder explained. He was pulling off his tunic as he said it, revealing a more fitted sleeveless shirt underneath. It was bright red and contrasted with the red and black patchwork pants he was wearing. "Something like this would probably take a day or two to work out, but I've already got it down." So Sealder jumped up on the table. He had a feather in his teeth and Quint couldn't figure out where he'd gotten it from. Just as abruptly the small man started to dance with surprising grace, his movements quick and precise, but not sharp. Quint tried to speak but found he couldn't. The words formed just fine but no sound issued even as his mouth moved. The sorcerer made a gesture and Sealder stopped his dancing. "Well, I was wrong," Quint admitted as the oddity of the situation sunk in. It wasn't as if he'd been married to the idea of the various classes' magic being more deeply different. He just didn't know what to do with the fact that they weren't. "At least you're quick to admit that," the sorcerer said with a slight nod. "What was the point of this exactly?" I mean, this was a lesson, yet? Quint asked, curious. I should think the utility of understanding that all magic is similar would be obvious, the sorcerer said acidly. Don't be an ass, Aaron, Sealder said with a sigh. He's been stalking you like a lovesick yearling, looking over your work and muttering. I think he fancies you as an apprentice. Sealder. Aaron said sternly. Oh please, you've got the charisma of a mule. If I don't say it you'll just keep creeping about leaving your weird little love notes all over his papers, Sealder said. Aaron swatted at him but the small man flipped backwards out of range and tumbled neatly off the table before taking off running. I do not want you as an apprentice, Aaron shouted. Well, did you want to fuck me then? Quint asked. He knew that wasn't right but couldn't get the idea out of his head after what Sealder had said. That and the alarming question of how it would work given Aaron's lack of flesh. No. I had little enough interest in that in life, and less than none now, Aaron said flatly. Okay, Quint said, hands up in surrender. Ugh, mouthy halfling. What I wanted to do was ensure that you were prepared for what 42S asked of you. I don't honestly care what happens to you personally, but this endeavor matters to her and she would prefer you live as well as succeed, Aaron said and sighed. Nice of her, Quint said. He'd thought as much, he wouldn't have taken the deal otherwise, but it wasn't exactly reassuring to hear the way Aaron was saying it. So, expect to continue to receive notes, Aaron said, starting to rise to his feet. What's so different between you doing this and being your apprentice? Quint asked on impulse, also standing. As much as he hadn't exactly enjoyed it, the notes had been helpful once he managed to understand them. If he could have the man himself explain what they meant he'd likely make better progress or at least not screw up quite so much. A contract is involved traditionally, you would become my responsibility and I have no interest in such an arrangement, Aaron explained, a note of disgust in his voice. He was walking and Quint was jogging to catch up to him. Well, what's more than now and less than that? Teacher? Quint asked. Tutor, a teacher has more than one student, Aaron said. Tutor me then? I can only understand about half of your notes, and that's after a couple of days of trying, Quint asked, getting in front of Aaron directly. The man tried to go around but Quint kept pace, backpedaling easily from long practice. You didn't turn your back on an enemy if you enjoyed living. Haven't your teachers explained them? Aaron asked, exasperated. They don't get them either, or just don't care. They said I don't need to know that much to cast the spells so why bother, Quint said honestly. That had been one of the things that bothered him about his training. They'd allude to things like him eventually making his own spells, but never got into how it worked or what he'd need to learn. Even how a given spell functioned was generally glossed over. You don't. Aaron stopped in his tracks. Quint had been too focused on keeping pace and stopped just abruptly, which cost him his balance and had him on his ass. Ha, they think you don't need to know how your spells work to use them? No wonder your arrays are such a mess. Get up, we're burning that tome of yours and starting over, Aaron said, taking off again. Starting over? Quint asked as he struggled to his feet. It won't take long to fix, you've hardly learned anything anyway, Aaron said darkly. Quint nodded as he jogged after Aaron. He was getting the distinct impression he'd just bitten off more than he could chew.